This screencast is going to look at a past exam question focused on activity-based costing. So again, I assume you've read through it, so I'm just going to go through how you should approach a question like this if it was in your exam. So the first thing you'll always be looking at is read the requirements. So requirements will tell you what marks are going, so that'll give you a guide as to how long you can spend on each one, and you'll get a general idea what's expected in the question. So here we're asked is the cost and profit per unit, so you need to give both. So that's the first thing I'll be highlighting, using the traditional costing system, and the same type of requirement using activity-based costing. And then part C is asking discussing the reasons for the differences in A and B and outline implications for the business. So not an unusual requirement for an activity-based costing question. Use a normal system, then use the ABC system, and then discuss the differences. So overall there you have 29 marks. So it's nearly a third of your paper just on those core requirements. Part D then asks if you're two little add-ons around margin and looking at the somewhat activity-based management. So we'll come back to that by changing the quality or possibly changing the price of one of the products, and therefore 9 marks. And then part E is really around the suitability of ArdCo to introduce ABC. And so watch out for these ands. Make sure you answer both the elements of the question and outline 3 key steps the company should undertake before implementing. So 50 marks, half your exam, you have roughly an hour to answer something like this in the exam. So once you've read the requirements, you have a general idea of what's asked. Then I will go through and read the whole question and have a red biro or have a highlighter to make sure you're highlighting the key elements. So I've assumed you've read through it already, so I'm not going to read through it again, but I will highlight some of the key things. So always ask yourself, why am I told certain information? So why am I told it's gone from being very labour intensive to highly automated? That's the first question. That'll be relevant for ABC. So the redundancies have left a mark on employee relations and morale. So we have to be careful about that when we're changing the system. And we're told what the direct labour costs are now in 2015. They're 3.6 million. They have 2 products. So 2 we're dealing with here. The Bala desk, which is the majority of the bulk orders. So that's the most popular one. And then there's the promo desk, which is targeted at multinational companies. So it's a more bespoke offering. And both of them have their own brand manager with a bonus scheme based on profit. So again, ask yourself, well, why am I told that? Because if you change the profit or how it's calculated, well, that's obviously going to change the bonus. So you have to link into the information that's given. So they practice this as you go through. So highly competitive market within price competition. So again, that means we need to make sure we have accurate costings to have accurate pricing. You said, despite the competition, they've been pleasantly surprised with Promo. So they're happy with Promo's performance, but they're not happy with Bala. So Bala said, continues to be poor and consistently behind target. So that's the one that's the higher volume, lower price product. And Kate Ryan, the brand manager, thinks that this poor performance is due to the fact that the price is not as competitive as other operate. However, the exec team argue that the price change must reflect an appropriate margin. So saying it's all well and good saying you need to change the price, but we still need to make a profit. So that's your kind of background of the question. It's gone from highly labour intensive to highly automated. We know they have 2 products and we know there's certain things going on in the organisation. So that's exam level using the background of the question to inform your answer. And then we're given the key information, the costings for Bala and Promo. So Bala, lower price, higher volume. Promo, higher price, lower volume. The traditional system is based on allocating indirect cost using direct labour hours. So that's important. So that's for your part A is the direct labour hours will be the based allocation, and the total overheads or indirect costs for this year were 8.7 million. So you're trying to highlight the key piece of information. Well, Caitlin's thinking about ABC and she wants to see, well, what can we use ABC and will there be a different conclusion? And then you're given a relevant cost pools, what we're called, and you're also given the relevant cost drivers. So a very similar setup to most ABC questions you're looking at. You're now asked to cost them using the traditional system, which is direct labour hours, and then recost them and the profit using ABC. So you do need to invest. It is an hour you have for the question. I would be investing at least 4 or 5 minutes, making sure you know what's expected of the requirements and highlighting the key information. And always ask, why am I told that? Okay, so our first one then is part A, and we're looking at the traditional costing system. And that is based on direct labor hours, DL hours. So we're going to cost two of them. We're going to cost the BALA and the promo. Now remember, the traditional system just says take your full overheads and allocate them based on some volume driver. In this case, whatever more direct labor hours are worked, the more allocation of overheads that product gets. And we only have two products in this organization. So direct materials, they should be relatively straightforward. We know the cost per unit for each of those desks. It's €100 and it's $350. No issue there. So there'll be a mark or two going for just slotting in that. But we're then looking for what about the direct labor cost? And then you'll have your overheads. So the direct labor cost we don't know. What we know is the hours per unit. But remember, ask yourself, why am I told information? We're told the total direct labor cost for the year was 3.6 million. So this is an exam level one. You might get one or two of these in a question just to see, can you work out, it may not be spoon fed to you, but you'll have enough information to figure out what they're looking for. So we now know how many hours are worked by each unit. So that means if we come down here, the direct labor hours for BALA are 3 hours per unit and from promo are 3 hours. And we know the units produced. The units produced for BALA are 20,000 and for promo are 5,000. So that means we know the total labor hours. So you know what the total labor hours are there. Total direct labor hours are 60,000 hours worked for BALA and 15,000 labor hours worked for promo. So you're going to need this to be able to allocate out. So we now know here that there is 75,000 direct labor hours worked in 2015. And we also know the total labor cost was 3.6 million. So total labor cost was 3600. So you can actually get the labor cost per hour very quickly. So that was quite of a tricky one, but you have to ask yourself, well, if I have the hours and I have the total, now there are other ways of going about it, just dividing by the units, because they happen to use the same amount of labor hours, that's fine as well. But you do need the number of labor hours for the second part. So labor cost per hour here will be €48 an hour. So you're saying the labor cost per hour is 48, and that means the direct labor cost per unit, which we want, is 48 times 3, because each unit takes 3 labor hours. So the labor cost for each unit, and they actually happen to be the same, because both of them happen to take 3 hours each. So in that case, you're going to charge 3 times 48 is €144 for each unit. So now we have both our direct costs. The direct cost of BALA is 244, direct cost of promo is 494. But the other thing we need to allocate here is the overheads, or what we call the indirect cost. And we know the total indirect cost was 8.7 million. Now we know how they're split up, but for the traditional system we only have one bucket, the full amount, and then we'll allocate it based on one volume driver. So the overheads are 8.7. And we know the total direct labor hours, DL hours, are 75,000. And you're told the traditional basis is direct labor hours as a base of allocation. The logic being the more hours you work, the more overhead you are getting. So there's an assumption there that the more hours worked, the more overheads are consumed. That may be a very basic assumption, but that's what the traditional uses. So the overhead per direct labor hour is 116. So we call that overhead per DLH. So that's our basis there. It's going to be, and because both of them work the same hours, they're actually going to get the same overhead allocation. Whether that's right or not is another thing, but both of them are going to get. So just so you know here, that's 116 times 3, and this is 48 times 3. So because both of them work use the same amount of hours per unit, they will be both allocated the same overhead. Now that may be a very crude one, but that's how the initial one is looking for. So the total cost here for each of them, so the cost per unit, which is the first thing you're asked for, is 592 for Bala and 842 for promo. So just put a border there. So 592 and 842. And remember, not only you ask for the cost if you come down, you're also asked for the profit per unit. So the profit per unit, you get your sales price, and I'll just leave a space, that gets your profit per unit as well. You're told in the table of information, you sell Bala for 625, and you sell promo for 1,000. So therefore, the price minus the cost is your profit. So small profit on Bala and a larger profit per unit on promo. So that's your first part of the question answered. You have your cost per unit using the traditional system, and you also have your profit per unit. So nice and straightforward. The only tricky bit there was you had to calculate the labour cost per hour. You're given the total, you're given the number of hours, you just have to work back. So we're saying both of them are profitable, but on a per unit basis, promo or promo is more profitable than Bala. So your next part then is to do a similar calculation, but now we're going to do it for activity-based costing. So we're changing the basis of how we're going to allocate the overheads. So what you're actually doing for part B is you're setting up the same system. So we'll just come down, very similar presentation, and we're just going to say it's going to be B here, and you're going to say the ABC system, and we're going to have 4 cost pools plus 4 cost drivers. So we're saying it's not good enough just to allocate those overheads based on direct labour hours, because the logic is that 8.7 million, which is these 4 figures here, they're actually distinct activities that are going on in the overheads. And the logic of ABC says, well, let's look at what's driving the overheads rather than looking at a single cost pool. So we're now looking at 4 cost pools. So if you sum all those together, that's your 8.7 million. And we're saying they shouldn't be just allocated evenly because of the direct labour hours. They should be allocated based on the usage of that driver. So the more setups, the more machining costs you get, the more service calls, the more customer management costs you get, which seems a fairer and more accurate allocation. So the first thing to note is your direct costs do not change. They are directly attributable to the product, therefore they're fine overall. They will not change. The only one that's going to change now is your overhead. We're no longer going to allocate based on direct labour hours. We're going to have to come down, and that's why there's more marks going for this, and we're going to have to set up a little table. So we're going to do the overheads table, and you have machining, quality, customer management, and deliveries. And we're saying we're allocating the overheads So if you tot them up, that's where your 8.7 comes from. So we're saying we're not doing a new figure, we're just getting it more accurate based on our allocations. And remember, what you're trying to do now is we're saying, well, what's the cost per setup? Or what's the cost per inspection? So that we're looking here for the total cost driver. So if we can get the total for each of these, which is, remember, we only have 2 products, so it's the total of these. 375 for Bala and Promo added together. 200 inspections overall. 1150 service calls. And then we have 400 deliveries. So what we're saying then is, if we can get the cost per cost driver, so the cost per driver, that will allow us then allocate it to each of the 2 products, to Bala and Promo. So that's always your steps when activity-based costing is, you get your overheads table, you get your what we call the cost pools, so it's the pool of costs that are similar, and you get the driver for each pool, and you'll be given that in the exam. So here it's 4.5 million over 375 setups. So it's 12,000 there. I'll just do this, tidying up, per setup. That's the first thing. So you're saying the cost of that is 12,000 per setup. The more setups, the more costs is your assumption. For quality, it's 700,000 divided by 200 inspections. So that's per inspection. So that's why it's useful. We'll need this for part C and D, where there's certain, or part D, where there's certain calculations to be done. For customer management, it's 1500 over 1150. So it's about 1304 per service call. So you can estimate then how much each activity is costing you. And finally, then the deliveries are costing about 5,000 per delivery. And once you have that cost done, you then allocate the overheads to each of the products. So we need to allocate it then for Bala and for promo. So your first step, as always, get the cost per cost driver, which is useful in itself for activity-based management. But then we need to allocate each of these: machining, quality, customer management, deliveries, to Bala and promo, based on what they actually use. Now you can use percentages, and a lot of students will do that and say, well, it's 4.5 million times 175 over 375, and that's fine. But you do need this ability to say what these are, because that can be asked for activity-based management, is what is the cost per activity. That gives it a useful way of looking at things. So for Bala, it's 12,000 per setup times 175 setups. So they're getting allocated 2.1 million. Just tidy those up. And promo, we're getting allocated 12,000 times 200. So when you add them up, you know you're right because you've allocated the full amount. You have to check that. Because there's only 2 products in the whole business, you have to allocate the full one out. Quality is the same. 3,500 times 150 inspections for Bala, and 3,500 times 50 inspections for promo. And you add those up together, and you see the full 700 has been allocated. So I'll call that the total check. Your next one, customer management. You're saying it's 1304 find 350 service calls for Bala, and 1304 times 800 service calls for promo. And you add those up, and you're thankfully allocating the full amount out. So it is a bit tedious. There is a couple of calculations involved, but that's why there's 14 marks going for it. So it's all about laying it out clearly and being careful with your calculations. And finally, then the deliveries. 5,000 per delivery, 150 deliveries for Bala, and 5,000 per delivery, 250 for promo, which is your 2 million overall. And thankfully then, our 8.7 million has been allocated. So you can always do that sense check, even if it's just in your calculator, to make sure you have allocated all of it out, because you have to allocate the same amount. And in this case, we're saying we're allocating now 4.8 million to promo, based on each of them, and we're allocating 3.8 million to Bala. And of course, we don't want it in total, we want it on a per unit basis. So the number of units for Bala, they are high volume, they have 20,000 units. Promo are low volume, they only 5,000. So even though Bala do 4,000 or 4 times the amount of units, they're getting less overhead. So this activity-based costing looks to be giving a fair implication of what exactly is going on. So the per unit allocation here, 3.8 million over 20,000, is about €191 a unit overhead for Bala, and it's about €973 for promo. So that is completely different than what we did in the part A for traditional system, and that's what you're going to have to tease out in part C. So for activity-based costing, get the cost pools and allocate by the relevant driver, which will be told in the question, what's the best activity driver to link to the costs. Once you have that, you allocate it to each of the products you're looking at on a totals basis, and then you go on a per unit, because you're usually going to be asked on a per unit. So the overheads here are 191.58. So it's just a small bit of rounding, and then you're looking at 973.70. So it's down here, 973.7 and 191.58. And that is very different than up here, where we allocated 348 each. It looks like we've over allocated to Bala and under allocated to promo. So the total cost there is 435 for Bala and 1467 for promo. And our profit per unit, which you're also asked for, is sales minus costs, 189, and a loss of 468, 467.7. So you're not asked to comment in part B, so you just have to give the calcs. But we're starting to see now, when we compare and contrast both of them, there's significant differences. And that's what we're going to answer in part C. So for part C, remember to read it carefully. Discuss the reasons for any differences. That's the first part. In the unit costs. And then outline the implications for the mix and strategy. So 2 separate parts here to get your full marks. Now the first thing, the easiest thing for students I would have thought to do here is to do a little table out. So just come down here to after that. And you do a table out and you do cost. You'll do traditional. And you'll get the cost and you'll get the profit. And that's for Bala and promo. And I do the same for ABC. So nice clear table, just showing that in summary, here's the key piece of information we're comparing, and you'll then explain, well, why is there a difference? So it's very straightforward, but it's nice to have. So for the ABC, we're going to take the costs and the profit. So there's your cost, 435 and 1467, and your profit. And we'll do the same for the traditional. The traditional is slightly different. Your profit of 33 and 158. So I just do a little table at the start of a question like that, just to have all the information in front of you so you're comparing and contrasting the right ones. And what I'd say the reason for the differences then is the basis of how the systems work. So you're just explaining that in the traditional system, we allocated the same overhead to both because both used direct labour hours. And both had the same number of direct labour hours. So that basis, both of them got 348 of overhead. However, the ABC system uses a different basis, and it says, let's look at what is being consumed. And therefore, promo is going to get a lot more of the overheads and therefore have a lot more of the costs. Why? Because although promo is a very low volume, so it's a quarter of the volume of Bala, it uses more setups, it uses disproportionately more inspections, so it doesn't use 1/4 on inspections. It uses a lot more service calls and a lot more deliveries. And that's what we're getting students to figure in is promo, the high value bespoke one, is a lot more resource intensive. And therefore it should be getting allocated a lot more of the overheads as a fair reflection of costs. That's the main reason of why there's a difference. The implications then, the good students will link it to information in the question. So remember, you go back, why do we highlight these things? You'll link it to say, well, if we change this system now, that's going to have an impact on the brand manager's bonus. Right? The promo brand manager is going to have a big surprise because they're going to be loss making as opposed to being profitable. So they'll have no bonus. And the Bala manager is going to have an even bigger bonus. So that needs to be managed in terms of conflict and expectations. Second implication is what we've highlighted here. If we've over-under costed, we're of course going to have over-under pricing. And that may reflect the problem we're having with Bala, where in recent times it's poor and consistently behind target, because we can see here we probably have it overpriced. We're currently making a huge profit based on a price of 625, and our competitors are probably pricing it down and still making a reasonable profit on it. Likewise, no wonder we're doing well with promo, because we probably have it underpriced. We're undercharging it €1,000 because the true cost of it is actually €1,400. So as much as possible for those narrative questions, you need to link it back to the facts of the case. 8 marks, you're looking for 8 solid points. Probably 3 or 4 solid points about the reasons for the differences and 3 or 4 solid points about the implications. But as much as possible, link it back to information you're given in the question. And that's why it's useful to highlight that information at the very first reading. And I always ask, why would that be relevant? So you can have a look at that in the solution. We'll move on into the calculations part D, and we'll look at part 1. So this is kind of more applied style questions you'll get every so often of using your knowledge of ABC to come up with little answers to little specific questions you might have. So assuming the ABC system is implemented, determine the price that is required to be charged for promo only to ensure that ArdCo will make the same margin as per the traditional system. Alright, so let's look at first and then comment. So the traditional system for promo, you have the sales price, so we'll call it SP, you have the cost, and you have the profit. So for promo, which we're only looking at, the selling price is 1,000. The cost in the traditional was 842, and we made a profit of 158. So they're saying, what margin did you earn there? Now remember here, margin equals profit over sales price. So what percentage of your sales price fell to profit? And that will be 158 over 1,000, which is 15.8%. That's your first step for a mark, was calculate the existing margin based on the traditional costing system. So it's 15.8 or rounded up to 16, right? So that's fine. But now we want to know, well, what would we have to charge promo if we implemented the ABC system? So the ABC system the sales price, we're looking for that. The cost we now know for promo. We know the cost for the promo is 1467. And then the profit, we're trying to figure out that as well. So we're trying to do a bit of a scenario to look at what would we have to charge to make the same margin? Because that's what Kate is worried about in the managers. They're saying they have to make sure the executive team, the price of charge must reflect an appropriate margin over the production costs. So what we're saying here is we need the profit. So we need profit over selling price to be equal to 15.8%. Now this is quite of a tricky one. So that means cost over selling price must be equal to 100% minus 15.8 is 84.2%. So that's how you work it back. You're saying, if I want to find my target price, I know if profit over selling price must be 15.8, my cost over my selling price must be 84.2%. So therefore, 1467.7 equals 84.2%. Sorry, I'll just put that. And therefore, you do 1467.7 divided by 0.842 to get what the 100% should be. So you're getting somewhere around 1743. Now, anywhere around that will be fine. So that's your desired selling price. Now, that's quite tricky, but you're trying to work back to say, I need to charge something so that when I get my profit, it'll be 15.8%. So that means my cost as a percentage of sales must be the difference, must be 84.2. And just to prove that, if that's 1743.1, my profit is sales minus costs is 275.4. So profit as a percentage of revenue is your 15.8 when you round up. And my cost as a percentage of revenue is your 84.2. So you know you're right, and that's a common enough question. So you need to make sure you understand, and it's a very practical one to say, well, what do we need to charge to earn that margin? Right? That's always the way a lot of retailers will look at, or even sellers, to make sure the distributor is earning enough of a margin. So the answer there is we need to charge 1743 because the costs have changed. And comment on that, that means you need to increase the price by 74.3%, which is very big, which is a very big increase. Particularly in the context, if you go back to the question, you're told highly competitive market with intense price competition. That may not be feasible. So we've set it at a too low of a price already, and we're essentially now locked in to some extent in that without going to lose a lot of our market share. So there's a kind of a little practical scenario using activity-based costing to understand if we're getting a more accurate product cost now, what implication might that have on our pricing decisions? So it links in a bit to marketing as well. Your other one is more around activity-based management, note 2. And what it's asking is, the production manager is considering changing the quality procedures for promo. So the quality inspections now would occur after every 500 units are produced. Quantify the potential cost saving based on activity-based from part B, and identify 2 non-financial as well. So 2 aspects. Quantify the saving, and then identify 2 non-financial factors. So make sure you give both. So, well, what we want to know is what's currently the procedure. Well, currently the procedure is promo had 50 quality tests. So the current is the units are 5,000 for promo, and the quality tests were 50. So that means tests every 5,000 divided by 50 is every 100 units. So what they're saying there is they currently test every 100 units based on the information that's given. And every quality test costs, and this is where you have to go back and use the activity-based information, every quality test or inspection is costing 3.5 grand. So that's where you had to use that information from part B. So if you did the pro rata and you didn't get that information, you would have been lost in D part 2. This is around activity-based management. So it costs 3,500 from part B. So we're now saying the new testing regime or proposed regime will be every 500 units. So that means the number of tests needed will be 5,000 units, but now you're only testing for every 500 of a batch. So now you only need 10 tests. So you're going to have a reduction of 40 tests. So you're reducing the number of tests by 80%, going from 50 down to 10. And that means the savings, which you're asked to do to quantify, using activity-based management, the 40 times 3.5. So you'd expect that to save you 140,000 euro. That was now it's only 5 marks, so don't be too worried if you don't get them. There's plenty of opportunity to get the basics right. But what you're looking for here is, can you use the activity-based costing information for activity-based management? And to round out to get 2 marks to finish it off, so the calcs there would have been 3 marks, the 2 non-financial factors. So again, most people would have got these here very quickly, any justifiable point. The key thing was, this is your premium product, promo. It's for your multinational, bespoke offering. So again, you want to make sure it's good quality. And if you're reducing by 80% the number of tests, that may impact on the quality offering. It could impact on the relationships with customers. If you're having issues with quality, it's going to create conflict. And I suppose the logic is, it's a relatively small cost saving in the overall scheme of 8.7 million inspections or 8.7 million overheads. So maybe there's better places to get a bigger win with less risk. For example, reducing the number of setups, which may not impact on quality. So what you're trying to look at there is whether the cost benefit is really relevant in the context of the question. But it's only a mark for each point, and it's only 5 marks overall, so don't get too caught up on it there. But that's a nice way of seeing how you can link in activity-based costing information and activity-based management. So finally then, for 12 marks is discuss the appropriateness of introducing ABC and ArdCo and outline 3 key steps. Now, in the company's particular circumstance, that's the key thing, is use the information in the case again. And remember, be strategic here. You could have answered part E before part D. So if you're struggling here for 9 marks, get your 12 marks and be strategic with your exam technique. So get the marks you can on the board first, then worry about everything else. Now, I'll leave you to have a look at this in the solution, but some of the key things I'm looking at, is ArdCo suitable for ABC? Well, the first thing is, it's gone highly automated now with a significant amount of overheads. So when you have a lot of overheads and you have a lot of automated processes, it suggests that ABC is important to allocate those overheads clearly. Likewise, you're told here that they're highly competitive in an intense price competition industry on the market. That means accurate product costing is important. And it clearly shows from our initial analysis that the traditional costing system is overpricing and underpricing the products, which is having an impact on the performance in the market. as we're seeing here with the information about Promu and Bala. So for intense price competition, high level of overheads, and the current performance issues, it suggests that ABC would be suited to an organisation like this and would bring a bit of a benefit. Now, that's been caveated then by the second part is, what key steps should you undertake? Well, the first thing is to get your employees on board. There's a lot of changes over the last while, and employee relations and morale are probably at a low, so you have to make sure they're on board and they understand why these changes are taking place. Second thing is you need to realign your performance measurement. So linking back to the other area of AC548, to explain to the brand managers and understand, well, what impact will this have on profits, and will there be resistance to change if some, for example, the Promu brand manager they're going to lose out on their profits. And then more practical things around change management and an appropriate IT system to be able to track all this information on a more regular basis. So they're just some of the practical things. As long as it's linked to the facts of ArdCo and it's tailored to what exactly has been asked, you'll get your marks. But watch out for those ands and questions. You're probably talking 6 marks for the first part, the appropriateness, and 6 marks for the second part, which is the 3 steps. So that was a past exam level question on activity-based costing. We talked about the approach to reading the question, to highlighting the key information, and then the key thing about managing your time. So if certain things are struggling with it, leave it till the end. Deal with all what I call the low-hanging fruit, the stuff you can, first, and get those marks. So 50 marks, half your paper, which is roughly an hour in an exam setting.